Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Weiss's Financial Literacy Podcast, where we take complex and important financial topics and bring more financial literacy to you. Joining me today is Patrick Macqueen with Medalist Legal in Chandler, Arizona. And one of the best ways, I think, to contact Mr. Macqueen is to go to his website at medalistlegal.com. Thank you so much for joining me today, Patrick. We're going to discuss a bunch of reasons that estate planning matters. And I think we're going to find that these things apply to, each and every resident of Arizona. And so I'm really excited to dig in. For those of you who don't know me, of course, my name is Carl Weiss. I'm a residential loan officer at Fairway Independent Mortgage Corporation. My NMLS number is 263293. I'm licensed in over 20 states. And what we're going to be discussing here today specifically applies to our friends, families, and clients who reside in Arizona, unless Patrick's licensed in other states that we want to discuss, and I'll get into that in a second. Patrick's in my discussion today, of course, is general in nature, and we're not giving any specific tax, legal, or mortgage advice. Of course, if you have any specific questions or something, and you want to know how it relates to you and your own situation, reach out to us individually, to either Patrick or myself, and we can give you specific advice. So with that, again, thank you so much for your time today, Patrick, and joining me. And we're going to dive into a few segments here. I'm going to do my best to keep these concise, so we'll see how well I do. You might be able to, but I'm not sure I can. And we'll dig deeper whenever necessary. But I thought, maybe we'd kick this thing off with kind of having you help us understand, again, specifically probably as it relates to Arizonans, what is the difference between a will and a trust?
Well, thanks, Carl. I appreciate you having me on here. And I am admitted to practice in other states. And we're primarily going to talk about Arizona today because I primarily work in the state of Arizona. So this advice will be, or these suggestions or this information will largely be driven by Arizona law. Now, each state, I should say this, we have some similarities with other states in terms of what you can do here in Arizona and what you can do in other states. There may be word differences, there may be definitional things that are a little bit off, but in terms of what you can do in most states, we have a lot of similarities with the other 49 states that we have. So in any event, so some of this stuff will make sense in other states, but we're going to largely, I'll target it towards the Arizona audience. You asked a really good question. You asked, what is the difference between a will and a trust? A lot of times people use those words very, very interchangeably. And they say, oh, I have a will and a trust, or I don't know what I have. I think it's a will and a trust. Well, they're two very, very different things. A will is a document that outlines your wishes upon your passing. You can outline your wishes for real estate, for your personal property, for your kids, but it requires a lot of different things than what a trust does. It requires, if you have a will, you have to go through probate to prove that you are the one who signed that will, to prove that the named executor is the appropriate person to be the executor of your will once you pass. So it is a document. A will is simply a document that outlines your wishes upon your passing. A trust is basically another entity that takes over ownership while you control it. It takes over ownership of your property. And because a trust continues to own and operate your property after your passing, there's usually no need for probating trust assets or assets that have been conveyed to a trust. Okay. So a trust is a whole separate entity that is used for real estate purposes, for estate planning purposes, and largely for the most people out there, trusts are largely set up to avoid probate. So people talk about avoiding probate all the time. What can I do to avoid probate? Well, a trust is a really, really good idea, a good option to avoid probate. So they are very, very different documents. A will requires certain formalities. You have to have two witnesses and a notary, and you have to, prove all sorts of things to prove that those witnesses, actually sign the document, etc. With a trust, much less formal, and the trust is what continues on and continues to own those assets as you're if you're gone or when you're gone.
Okay, and you're right. We hear that all the time, avoid probate, avoid probate. What the heck is probate? And why would we want to avoid it? How bad is it? Must be really bad if everybody talks about avoiding it, right?
Well, for I would say for the most part, people want to avoid probate. And what I'm referring to, probate is a type of court action, and it's also a type of court here in Arizona, anyways. So we hear a probate court or a probate action. It's a lawsuit, and that's why you want to avoid it. I mean, it is a filing with the court. It's a lawsuit. Probate in and of itself means to prove. And remember what I said, we are trying to prove that you actually signed this will, that you weren't under duress or some sort of other incapacity, that these are your actual witnesses, that these were your actual desires, etc. And so probate requires proof. It is to prove something. And largely it is to prove that you signed the will, that this person is the appropriate person to take over your estate and distribute the assets. Now, you can also have probate when you don't have a will. So people say, well, I don't have an estate plan. Not having an estate plan is an estate plan.
Gotcha. Okay.
Weird way to look at it. But what happens if you don't have an actual written estate plan is that we go by our various statutes here in Arizona that outline who gets what and when. And so that is an estate plan. It is the state's plan, essentially.
Okay, so yeah, so one's been set up for you, even if you haven't set one up. It's just been set up by the state of Arizona in this case.
Exactly. The statutes of whatever state that you reside in, every state has what's called an intestacy statute, meaning you passed away without a will. So a will is a good idea, certainly, because it outlines your wishes, etc., and doesn't leave anybody really guessing. But you can also have an estate plan where you don't have a will. You pass away intestate, it's called, and your heirs are still going to have to go through probate. So anyway, that's a sort of a divergence of your question of what is probate and should I try to avoid it. Probate is basically, again, a lawsuit to prove that you signed the will, that you own these certain assets. And it's usually a good thing to avoid probate because people don't want, their parents, their grandparents' information out publicly, because this is public filing. It's a lawsuit. It's costly, and it can take some time to get through, particularly if there are issues that are contested. And so that is why we want to usually avoid probate. A trust, as we just talked about, avoids probate. There are some other things that we can talk about that also help to avoid probate. But the goal for most people, again, is to get all of their assets into basically non-probate assets, turn them into something other than an issue that has to go through probate.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So essentially, the takeaways I hear on the probate side are, it's a lawsuit, so that means that it's going to be expensive because you're probably not doing this on your own. You're going to have to pay for an attorney to help you navigate these waters. It's costly. It takes a long time to get through that system because it's the court system, right? And then if it's contested, it gets even worse and probably more expensive. Are those
exactly?
Is that fair?
Oh, 100%.
Okay.
100%. So probate may be good for someone who wants to contest your will because now they have a chance at actually getting some of your assets that you otherwise didn't want them to have.
Okay.
But again, the trust automatically transfers. Your property is already owned by that trust. You basically don't own it at the time of your passing. Therefore, there's nothing to probate. So
Gotcha.
that's why it's very important to sort of hit on the distinction between what a will and a trust are. Trusts are very important. I think they can be a major benefit to a lot of people. Not everybody needs one, but to a lot of people. And the bulk of people use trusts simply to avoid probate. Now, there are some fancy tax planning that people can do with trusts. There's some other asset protection things that you can do with trusts. But for the majority of people out there, a basic probate avoidance trust is really all you need.
Great. Okay, well, that'll wrap this session. Stick around for our next segment here in just a moment. We'll be right back with Mr. Patrick Macqueen. Stand by.